Hey, what's up? It's cute what if? This side. Today we will be seeing what if Deku's world changed Rei Todoroki's fate. Before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. Mei found herself in a state of confusion. The last memory she held was of passing away peacefully, surrounded by her beloved daughters and grandchildren. After a fulfilling life, she had been ready to embrace the end. But now, she awoke to a world filled with intense pain. As her vision began to clear, she heard shouts and the hurried movements of people in scrubs around her. The pain in her abdomen was overwhelming. Suddenly, a woman with raven hair in a doctor's coat sat near her legs and began to speak. It was almost time for her to start pushing, the doctor urged. Dazed and disoriented, Mei instinctively followed the instruction, but soon felt the temperature around her drop. Through her half-closed eyes, she noticed ice forming on her fingertips and spreading outward. The doctor shouted for someone to call Mr. Todoroki, believing that a familiar presence would help calm her. The next few moments were a blur of excruciating pain as the doctor guided her through breathing exercises and encouraged her to push. The door opened, and a man entered, wearing a burgundy shirt that showcased his muscular build. He sat beside her and took her hand, a warmth radiating from him that helped her calm down, causing the ice around her to melt. Though he looked familiar, she couldn't fully place him. The pain intensified, and the doctor urged her to push again. Mei was bewildered. Death was supposed to be peaceful, not filled with such agony and surrounded by strangers. Then time seemed to freeze. A piercing cry echoed through the room as a small bundle was placed on her chest, several hands quickly tending to the newborn. She clutched the baby tightly, her gaze landing on the man beside her. He was smiling, but then his expression shifted to wild laughter as flames erupted from his mustache and beard. Recognition dawned on her. She realized who this man was. Looking down at the baby in her arms, she noticed the unusual hair half red and half white. It clicked. The only person she knew with such hair was Shoto Todoroki from My Hero Academia. Panic began to set in as she recognized the man as Endeavor. Just as fear gripped her, she heard a voice calling her name before darkness enveloped her. The doctors believed she had amnesia, but Mei knew the truth. Somehow, after her death, she had found herself in the My Hero Academia universe, inhabiting the body of Rei Todoroki during labor. She felt foolish for not recognizing the labor pains, having experienced them before with her 3 daughters. Was it the shock of being alive again that clouded her mind? She didn't have time to ponder as the baby in her arms stirred with a soft whimper. After her sudden fainting spell, chaos erupted in the room. Enji demanded to know what was happening to his wife while the doctors focused on stabilizing Rei and taking the crying baby from her limp arms. Hours later, when she regained consciousness, she learned the full story. A villain had escaped and sought revenge, targeting her children. In a moment of panic, her quirk had activated, stalling the villain long enough for her daughter to call Endeavor, who arrived just in time. However, the stress had induced her labor, leading to her fainting after hitting her head. As she opened her blouse to nurse the child, she noticed Endeavor was nowhere to be found. He had been there earlier, his eyes filled with fury, a look that frightened her. She was aware of his past actions toward Rei and the family, a topic of heated debates with her daughter, who inexplicably admired him. Mei despised Endeavor for the pain he caused, especially to Shoto and Rei. Later, a nurse entered with baby Shoto, causing Mei to panic. She was now the mother of Shoto Todoroki, the handsome young hero her daughter had once idolized. Not only that, but she also had 3 other children, Tuya, Fuyumi, and Natsuo back at Rei's home. The reality of her situation sank in. She had a son and 3 children to care for. Raising boys was foreign to her, as all her children and grandchildren had been girls. Another pressing concern was Endeavor. She vowed to keep him away from her children, especially little Shoto. She was determined to ensure he never bore the scar he had in his teenage years. But what if she could change him? Her daughter often speculated about Endeavor's past and what drove him to be so obsessed with being number 1, even at the cost of his family. What if all he needed was a loving partner who wouldn't be SBMSSV? Perhaps he required guidance, a lesson in what family truly meant, a unit of love and support. She believed she could help him, but it would require immense patience and willpower. This was endeavor, after all. She worried about the possibility of physical abuse, not just verbal. If he attacked with fire, she would respond with ice. Looking down at the sleeping baby in her arms, she made a vow to provide him and his siblings with the life and father they deserved. Returning home was surreal. A chauffeur arrived to take her back. When she arrived, the atmosphere felt strange. The house that was supposed to feel like home was a modern structure that surprised her. The last time she remembered, the Todoroki family lived in a traditional Japanese home, as depicted in the manga, and Shoto had even brought tatami mats to his dorm room at UA. It was odd. Had they moved after Rei was sent to the hospital? As she entered the house, cradling the sleeping Shoto close to her chest, she heard small feet scurrying around. As she bent down to remove her shoes, tufts of hair peeked out from behind the door. The children were here. She called out to them, inviting them to come forward. Slowly, two figures emerged from behind the doorway, a girl and a boy, no older than 4 and 12, respectively. Fuyumi and Natsuo. She smiled at them, but soon the little boy's eyes filled with tears as he rushed to his mother, clinging to her legs and crying. He expressed how much he missed her, explaining that Fuyumi had said she went to the hospital to get the baby brother, but then their grandmother told them that she had been hurt. He was scared. Rei bent down, balancing Shoto in one arm while giving Natsuo a one-handed hug. She reassured him that she was okay now, despite her earlier injuries. It was a slip of the tongue when she affectionately called all her children Bubba, but it felt natural. The next few hours were filled with playtime and getting to know Natsuo, who was completely enamored with his younger brother and vowed to protect him always. Fuyumi remained a bit cautious and didn't speak much, but she too was captivated, her eyes shining as she held Shoto for the first time. Eventually, Natsuo grew tired, and Fuyumi awkwardly carried her brother to his room, which made Rei chuckle. As she was putting Shoto to bed in the nursery that Fuyumi had pointed out earlier, Fuyumi approached her with a serious expression. She asked if Rei really had forgotten everything, her voice trembling. Rei hugged her tightly as Fuyumi began to cry. She admitted that while she had forgotten many things, it didn't mean she loved them any less. She reassured Fuyumi that even without her memories, she was still their mother and still loved them deeply. As Fuyumi clung to her waist, Rei felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Once Fuyumi's tears subsided, Rei encouraged her to share stories about their family. Fuyumi began to talk about their household dynamics. She explained that it was usually just her, Natsuo, and their mother at home, with their father occasionally present, though their mother kept them away from him. Their grandmother mentioned an older brother who was sick and had been sent away by their father, a topic their mother never discussed, leading Fuyumi to believe she was the eldest. She recounted how, after receiving her quirk, their father had stopped bringing her toys and had shouted at her. This led to a significant fight between their parents, after which their mother began to hide them from their father, who started coming home less frequently. Fuyumi recalled how her mother cried often, which frightened her. Rei looked at the child in her arms with sadness. She realized that while Fuyumi and Tuya had already been affected, she could still protect Natsuo and Shoto. She tucked Fuyumi into bed and made herself comfortable in the living room. She didn't know when she fell asleep, but she awakened to the sound of the door opening. Blinking the sleep from her eyes, she saw NG enter. He stared at her for a moment before heading toward the kitchen. Rei called out to him, stating they needed to talk. He turned around, his gaze intense and intimidating, and responded gruffly, questioning what she needed. She insisted they talk about the family. NG tried to brush her off, claiming he didn't have time for such discussions. But Rei's voice grew firm as she reiterated the urgency of their conversation. His eyes widened in surprise, as it was the first time she had spoken to him in such a manner. He leaned against the kitchen counter, seemingly taken aback. Taking a deep breath, she looked him straight in the eye. She confessed that she didn't remember anything her childhood, why she married him, or even her children. She pleaded for his help. NG dismissed her again, stating he had business to attend to as a pro-hero. Rei, undeterred, asserted that whether he was a pro-hero or not, it didn't matter. He had a responsibility as her husband to help her when she needed it. She emphasized that he hadn't fulfilled that duty. Just then, cries echoed from upstairs. She informed Enji that she was going up to attend to Shoto but warned him that their conversation was far from over. She intended to continue it after breakfast the next day as she made her way upstairs to check on her baby. Enji woke up early in the morning to find Rei missing. He had been surprised when she had laid down beside him the previous night. The old Rei would have been uncomfortable sharing the same space with him, but the new Rei had simply settled in and drifted off to sleep. She must have thought it was normal for them to share a room, as they were husband and wife. Enji didn't mind her presence. It had been a long time since he felt the warmth of someone else beside his own flames. In the 16 years of their marriage, he had never shared a bed with anyone else, despite the attention he received from others. Even in a dysfunctional marriage, he had remained faithful to Rei, honoring the promise he made to her. He was a man of integrity, committed to keeping his vows. This was the same reason he aspired to be the #1 hero. He had promised his mother he would achieve that goal, and he had always kept his promises. He pushed his children to strive for greatness, knowing he could not defeat All Might himself in the time he had left. The next morning, Rei awoke to the soft whimpers of Shoto coming through the baby monitor on her nightstand. Enji was still asleep, so she quietly got up and made her way to Shoto's room. Entering the pale blue space, she saw her son whimpering with his eyes still closed. Gently, she picked him up and rocked him in her arms while humming a soft tune. It was time to feed him, and she realized he would also need a change. She carefully set him down on the changing table and began to attend to him. Shoto was a quiet child with a modest appetite, which concerned her. Her previous children had been much more demanding, filled with energy and cries that echoed through the night. Shoto, on the other hand, was calm and rarely made a fuss. She had almost missed his whimpers the night before, responding only out of instinct. After changing him, she settled into the rocking chair to feed him. Once he was finished, she placed him in a sling and smiled as he gazed back at her with his striking heterochromatic eyes. Rei had never noticed the unique color of his eyes before, thinking they were simply bright blue. She made her way downstairs, checking on Natsuo and Fuyumi before entering the kitchen. As she opened the cupboards to familiarize herself with their contents, she moved on to the fully stocked fridge. In one of the drawers, she discovered a well-organized recipe book, filled with handwritten notes and well-loved pages marked with bookmarks. If she had ever doubted Rei's abilities as a mother, those doubts vanished. The book was divided into sections for each child, containing specific recipes and baby food ideas. She noticed many pages were missing from the beginning, likely for her first child, but she didn't have time to ponder this as she heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Enji appeared, giving her only a brief glance as he headed for the door. She asked where he was going, and he replied gruffly that he was off to the agency. When she inquired about his return, he mentioned he would be gone for a few weeks. Sensing his impatience, she let the matter drop, reminding him to be careful. He huffed in response as he exited, the door slamming shut, startling Shoto. Rei gently rocked him until he calmed down and then began preparing breakfast. Instead of a typical meal, she opted for something different, knowing her children were sensitive to the heat. She decided on cold soba noodles, sashimi, and Rei's special dipping sauce. After finishing breakfast, she settled down with the morning newspaper, waiting for her children to wake up. Eventually, Natsuo and Fuyumi came down, still drowsy. Fuyumi looked around the room, asking quietly where their father was. Rei informed her that he had gone to the agency and would be away for a while. Fuyumi sighed in relief, and Rei helped the children freshen up and brush their teeth, taking their time without worry of their food growing cold. They sat down for a late breakfast, Shoto still in his sling. Rei observed her children as they interacted with one another and with her. Natsuo was lively and chatty, while Fuyumi was more reserved but still engaged. Rei realized that their family needed a lot of work, with many relationships to mend and new ones to build. It would be a challenging journey, but she was determined to put in the effort. Enji had said he would be gone for a few weeks, but it actually took 2 months for everything to settle down. During that time, he spent countless nights on the pull-out couch in his dark office, dealing with paperwork and villain confrontations. He could have gone home, but he didn't. Despite being the pro-hero endeavor, he was afraid to face Rei after their last conversation. The thought of what she might say or do filled him with apprehension, and that frustration lingered within him. And so here he was, completely frustrated, steam rising from his body as he unlocked the door to his house. Inside, the place was a chaotic yet organized mess. His expensive leather couch had been transformed into an impromptu fort, surrounded by blankets and toys scattered everywhere. From his vantage point, he could see the kitchen, which was clean and organized, but the countertops were overflowing with freshly baked cupcakes. This was the first time he had seen the house in such a state. It was usually pristine. He slowly made his way toward the stairs, where he heard voices. His son Natsuo announced that the popcorn was ready as he approached the stairs, holding a blue china bowl filled to the brim. Endeavor called out to Natsuo, causing the boy to flinch and drop the bowl, shattering the delicate material on the floor. Endeavor's frustration boiled over as he scolded Natsuo for his carelessness, emphasizing the bowl's expense. He grabbed Natsuo's hand tightly, causing the young boy to wince and cry out, tears streaming down his face as he struggled to break free. Natsuo pleaded for his father to let him go, but Endeavor insisted he needed to learn a lesson for his mistake. Just as he was about to pull Natsuo away, Rei came rushing down the stairs. From Rei's perspective, everything had been going wonderfully. After spending 2 months alone with the children, she had formed a new bond with them. They had played for hours, built forts in the living room, baked treats in the kitchen, and enjoyed sleepovers. Tonight, they were set to watch a movie. After putting Shoto to bed, they sent Natsuo downstairs for popcorn. Just as they were picking a movie, she heard the sound of something breaking and quickly descended the stairs. Upon reaching the bottom, she was met with a shocking sight. Enji was visibly upset, steam rising from him, as he held Natsuo in a fierce grip. Without hesitation, she rushed to Natsuo and pulled him into her arms, demanding Enji let him go. Her calm demeanor only seemed to intensify his anger as he insisted that Natsuo needed to pay for his mistake. Rei maintained her composure, reminding him that Natsuo was just a child who had made a mistake. It was Enji's responsibility as a father to teach him not to resort to harsh punishment. Looking down at Natsuo, who was cowering behind her, a wave of anger surged within her. She noticed the burn on Natsuo's hand, a painful reminder of the situation. In a whisper, she told Enji to leave, her voice rising in intensity as she repeated her demand. Enji scoffed, reminding her that this was his house and that he deserved her respect as her husband. Rei's response was fierce. She declared that he deserved nothing, not even the title of father or pro-hero. For the first time, Enji was left speechless, taken aback by her words and the sight of their son crying. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he slowly retreated outside, closing the door behind him as he made his way back to the agency. He attempted to bury himself in work, but the images of Rei crying and Natsuo's injured hand haunted him. He recalled Fuyumi, terrified and in tears, clutching the railing of the stairs, and for the first time in years, he remembered his firstborn. He recalled the fear he felt when he learned that his son could not use his quirk due to his frail body and how he had begged not to be separated from his mother. He remembered the flames rising as he rushed into the burning building, searching for his son, only to find nothing. Everyone in the school had perished in the fire, including Tuya. The memory of drowning his sorrows in alcohol flooded back, and he had never told Rei about Tuya's death. He couldn't bear the thought of her blaming him, so he had fabricated a story about Tuya being happy in a new home. As he opened the locked drawer in his desk, he contemplated his worthiness as a father and as a person, staring at the shining metal of his shotgun with hollow eyes. He couldn't believe what had happened to Rei. It was as if, without her memories, she had transformed into a completely different person. Gone was the shy and insecure Rei who had once struggled to meet his gaze. In her place stood a strong and confident woman who looked into his eyes with equal intensity and was willing to raise her voice to make her point. He found himself admiring this new side of her. He had always disliked the version of Rei who could only cry and scream in her broken voice. That was the shadow of the Rei he had fallen in love with back in school. Rei felt numb as she sat in the uncomfortable chair of the pale lilac waiting room. Her throat felt scratchy, and her eyes were swollen and red from hours of crying. Even though she felt immense sadness and anxiety, her tears had run dry. The sterile smell of disinfectant filled the air, making her scrunch her nose in discomfort. She had been waiting in the lilac room for over 5 hours, the same amount of time her husband had been in surgery, fighting for his life, the very life he had attempted to take just hours earlier. Rei was angry. She was angry at Endeavor for hurting their child, but deep down she felt guilt. She had said many awful things to him, cruel things that she now regretted. She felt conflicted. On one hand, she believed he deserved her anger, but on the other, she felt immense guilt for what she had said. Telling him he didn't deserve to be a father was wrong, and she knew they both needed to apologize. But not now. They both needed time to cool off. Both were hot-headed, and trying to talk while still angry would only lead to another confrontation, which she wanted to avoid. A few hours had passed since their fight. Rei had managed to calm both Fuyumi and Natsuo and had applied salve to Natsuo's burned hand. It took a lot of effort to put them both to bed, but after some persuasion and a promise of a special treat, they were finally tucked in. Just as she was about to settle in for the night, she received a frantic call from Enji's hero agency. Enji had attempted to take his own life. He had shot himself in the chest, narrowly missing his heart. His assistant had heard the gunshot and rushed into his office, finding him lying there, pale and in need of urgent help. And so, here she was, sitting in the hospital waiting room with her face buried in her hands, her eyes still red and puffy. She had left the kids in the care of Enji's assistant, Hiro, as she hadn't had time to call her mother. Hiro was the only person who knew about the situation besides the doctors. The entire incident was being kept under wraps. The media would have had a field day with a pro-hero attempting suicide, which would have caused a massive scandal. It was tragic, really. Enji's famous quirk, which had allowed him to defeat numerous villains and become one of Japan's top 10 pro-heroes, was now working against him. His fire quirk had become supercharged, burning through the antibiotics and medicines injected into him. His immune system was attacking his own body, damaging his organs, particularly his lungs. The doctors were racing against time to control the fever and close the bullet wound. Complications arose when the metal bullet began to melt due to the immense heat entering his bloodstream. There were over 11 doctors in the room, all trying to stabilize him, and some feared he wouldn't last the night, despite their efforts. Rei looked up when she saw Dr. Rin sit down beside her, still in his scrubs. She sighed as he turned toward her. He gently asked if she knew why Enji had done this. Rei could only shake her head in silence. The doctor continued, noting that whatever had happened must have been intense, as Enji was not one to give up easily. He had known Enji since he became a hero and never imagined he would do something like this. Rei felt her heart clench, tears gathering in her eyes. She felt as if she were drowning in her tears and guilt. Was this all her fault? Did her words push him to the brink? The doctor acknowledged that this must be extremely hard on her, especially with the update on his condition. Surprised, Rei asked about the disease. The doctor explained that Enji had been diagnosed with a rare and incurable condition known as KQ, where his quirk began to harm his body. He had been living with this condition for almost a decade. Rei asked what this meant for him. The doctor took a deep breath and exhaled, explaining that Enji's quirk was damaging his organs and the water content in his body. He had about a decade left to live, but after this incident, his lifespan had drastically decreased. Rei felt lightheaded as she walked through the mist, the sensation of time slipping away from her. She quickened her pace upon spotting the outline of a building, where hundreds of people dressed in black formal attire gathered. Entering the building, she made her way to the back of the room, where glass doors stood wide open, revealing a vast yard filled with more mournful faces. Staring at her reflection in a hallway mirror, she noticed that, like everyone else, she wore a black dress, her hair elegantly styled in a bun. Stepping outside, a light breeze gently swayed her dress. She approached the crowd gathered near a small, shimmering lake beneath a canopy. As she drew closer, the whispers among the crowd grew louder, and they parted to let her through. The soft whimpers of small children reached her ears. Fuyumi and Natsuo clung to their grandmother's black kimono. Minori Noera, looking regal in her own black kimono, held little Shoto in a sling, her expression filled with sadness as she gazed at her daughter. Rei shifted her focus from her children to the front, where a black casket lay. Her heart raced, and a sense of panic began to swell within her. She rushed forward and fell to her knees upon seeing the body inside. Tears streamed down her pale cheeks as she felt overwhelmed. People gathered around her, and she sensed her mother's hand on her shoulder, attempting to comfort her, but it was futile. Inside the casket lay pro-hero Endeavor, her husband, Rei Todoroki. She awoke with a gasp, clutching her throat, her white hair sticking uncomfortably to her neck. Tears pricked her eyes as she struggled to steady her breathing. Counting to 3, she jumped out of bed and made her way to the bathroom, pulling her hair into a tight ponytail while splashing her face with cold water. Sleep eluded her. It had been a week since Rei's surgery, which had lasted over 28 hours before he was finally stabilized. Though the doctors assured her he was stable, he had yet to awaken. An official press release announced that Endeavor would be taking a break from hero work to spend time with his family and newborn son. Despite the reassurances, she remained anxious, refusing to leave his hospital room for fear he would vanish in her absence. After a few days, the doctors insisted she return home, citing the need for her to rest. Reluctantly, she returned home, where her mother cared for her children. Their relationship was strained, as Minori often avoided Rei but was generous with her grandchildren. Rei had not informed her children about Endeavor, telling them she was helping a friend, which they accepted without much fuss, only complaining about the lack of treats their mother had promised. She continued to visit him at the hospital, her life settling into a new routine. Each day began with nightmares, followed by an hour spent trying to cool down in the shower, which her quirk made impossible. After breakfast, she cared for the children, enduring her mother's avoidance. At precisely 1 p.m., they had lunch, and by 4:30 p.m., the kids were down for a nap. That was when she would leave for the hospital, arriving by 5 p.m. to sit beside her husband's bed, staring at his pale face. Exhausted from the daily cycle, she decided to leave the hospital early one day. On her way home, she spotted a park filled with children playing. The scene was peaceful, and she chose to sit on a bench to watch them. The gentle breeze tousled her hair as she focused on the joyful children. The sounds of insects buzzing in the trees and the serene clouds overhead brought her a sense of calm. After days of panic, she felt truly at peace. She thought of her own children and resolved to bring them to the park. They needed to escape the confines of their home. Her thoughts were interrupted when a voice spoke from beside her. A pale man with black hair and dark eyes sat down next to her, blending effortlessly into the background. She offered him a small smile and acknowledged his presence, feeling a sense of connection in the tranquil atmosphere. The man gazed ahead, watching the children play in the sandbox. He remarked on the oddities of life, noting how one moment a person could be lying on their deathbed, surrounded by family, longing for peace, only to find themselves waking up in a different body within their nephew's favorite anime. Rei, taken aback, could only stare at him, her confusion evident. After a long moment, she finally managed to ask who he really was. The man introduced himself as Joji Mikado, sharing that, like her, he had awakened in this universe in the wrong body. Rei continued to observe him, her mind racing as she processed his words. After a lengthy silence, she could only utter a stunned response. The man's smile faded slightly as he continued, recounting his own bewildering experience. He explained how he had woken up in bed with a stranger, panicking at the thought of his wife finding out. However, the woman turned out to be his girlfriend, and after a chaotic series of events, he discovered he had amnesia. His girlfriend, believing he was merely acting strangely, took him to the hospital, where he was diagnosed. He described how she had promised to care for him, leading to 2 years spent together as he adjusted to his new life. Rei nodded, realizing she would be here for a while. The man continued his story, detailing how he had come to terms with his new reality until a stranger entered his bakery one day, asking to speak privately. The conversation took a serious turn when the man revealed he was also in the wrong body but retained all his memories from both his previous life and the life of the person whose body he inhabited. Rei gasped in disbelief, questioning how this was possible. The man explained that it was due to his quirk, similar to the Yamanakas from the anime Naruto, who could access memories. He elaborated that his friend had a unique ability called the Mindwalker quirk, which allowed him to recover memories and even share them with others. The man had experienced the same process and now possessed his memories. Rei was intrigued, realizing this meant she could regain her own memories as well. The man assured her that those who were reincarnated were often closely connected to the main characters of the story, which is how he had found her. He pointed out that Endeavor would never take a break to spend time with his newborn, leading him to observe her and eventually locate her. Rei asked if she could access all her memories, to which the man confirmed she could, thanks to his friend's quirk. He explained that while traumatic situations typically triggered memory recall, they had an easier way to retrieve everything, including her quirk's abilities. Excited, Rei expressed her desire to regain all her memories. The man agreed to call his friend and handed her a business card with the address of his bakery, inviting her to come by on Sunday to meet his friend and finalize the details. Just as he was about to leave, Rei inquired about his connection to the main characters. He chuckled, revealing that the woman he had been dating was now his wife, Inko Midoriya. Rei's eyes widened in recognition. He admitted he had initially lied about his name, revealing that he was actually Hisashi Midoriya. Rei gasped, realizing the significance of his identity. He smiled and showed her a picture of a baby with green hair, proudly stating that he was indeed the father of Izuku Midoriya. He hoped that Shoto could come over for a playdate once everything was sorted out. Rin could feel a tremendous headache growing on the horizon. She pinched her nose and steadily looked over at the doctor. She expressed her frustration, questioning why he hadn't informed her about her husband's worsening condition over the past decade. Dr. Rin smiled sadly as he opened his drawer and took out a familiar bottle of aspirin. He filled a glass with water and passed it to her along with the medicine. He explained that he had intended to inform her the moment her husband's symptoms worsened, but due to a confidentiality clause in their contract, he was unable to disclose any information without Enji's consent, not even to his own wife. Rei took the medicine with the water, turning her attention fully to the medical records in her hands. She tried to ignore the man in front of her. Although she knew it wasn't his fault, she still felt a sense of betrayal. Their past acquaintance only added to her frustration. Controlling her breathing to suppress her emotions, she finally turned back to him. She asked if there was any other way to help Enji, expressing her disbelief that there was no solution. The doctor shook his head, folding his hands on the table. He explained that they had no cure for his disease. The medicine they were giving him was dangerous and classified, meant only for medical professionals. Prolonged use was doing more harm than good, but they had no other options. Dr. Rin continued, emphasizing that the only reason he could share this information was because Enji was injured and she was his immediate family. He asked if she had noticed how Enji had gained muscle bulk over the years. Rei nodded, her eyes widening as the doctor revealed that they had been giving him steroids to prevent his body from burning its own organs. Rei began to understand many things. The steroids explained Endeavor's bulky form in the manga. The more muscle he had, the safer his organs were. This also clarified why he had been careful during fights, particularly one against a flying villain, where he had mentioned that overheating would damage his bodily functions. She recalled how during that fight, there were several scenes showing her and their children. Realization struck her. The reason Enji had married her was not only to create a powerful quirk but also to stabilize his own fire quirk so it wouldn't harm their descendants. That was why none of their children had these issues. She looked directly into Dr. Ren's eyes, a spark of hope igniting within her. She proposed a potential solution, suggesting they try stabilizing the flames with cold therapy. The medical files indicated that the condition was hereditary, yet none of her children had it, likely due to her quirk stabilizing his flames. She theorized that if they could cool down his body without extinguishing the flames completely, they could prevent harm. Dr. Ren's eyes widened as he considered her idea. He acknowledged that it was a plausible approach, suggesting light cryo-freeze or freeze therapy. He realized that all this time, they had focused on extinguishing the flames rather than stabilizing them. Grateful for her insight, Dr. Rin thanked her profusely, expressing his intention to inform the research team. He rushed to leave but paused to ask her to bring one of her children during her next visit, believing that studying their immune systems might hold the key to a solution. Rei smiled, tears of joy gathering in her eyes as she felt a renewed sense of hope. She glanced at her watch and gasped, realizing she was almost late for her appointment. She hurried out of the hospital, her heart light as she ran toward the bakery, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. NG would be safe, she knew it. Upon arriving at the bakery, the delightful aroma of baked goods and chocolate welcomed her. She quickly wiped her tears and approached the cheerful receptionist, asking for the owner and showing her the card Hisashi had given her. The receptionist led her to a door at the back of the building. Taking a deep breath to calm herself, she knocked on the door, ready to reclaim her memories. Rei slowly opened the door and stepped into the brightly lit room, which was decorated in a slightly eccentric manner. The walls of the bakery were painted a soft mint color, adorned with an array of papers in various hues, textures, and sizes, all pinned up with colorful tacks. They resembled recipes for an assortment of desserts. Several plaques and pictures hung on the walls, showcasing the bakery's numerous achievements. In the center of the room stood a large mahogany desk, cluttered with papers. Behind the desk, Hisashi was engaged in conversation with a man seated across from him. As Rei entered the room, both men turned to look at her. Hisashi greeted her with a smile, welcoming her to the bakery and inviting her to take a seat. Rei approached the desk and settled into the surprisingly comfortable mint chair. Hisashi introduced her to his friend, Amiro Kawasaki, who would assist her in recovering her memories. Amiro had striking pale hair that seemed to defy gravity, giving him a somewhat disheveled appearance. His green eyes held shadows beneath them, suggesting he hadn't slept well in days. He offered her a polite smile and extended his hand in greeting, introducing himself. Once everyone was settled, Amiro expressed his eagerness to begin, mentioning he was on a tight schedule due to some high-level villains brought in the previous night. He worked for the interrogation team at the local station. Rei nodded in acknowledgement, and Amiro continued, but Hisashi interrupted to inform them he would be stepping out to the kitchens, assuring Rei he would be nearby if needed. With Hisashi gone, Amiro explained the process. He would activate his quirk from behind her, and although she might feel disoriented at first, it was important for her to relax. She would experience her memories as if they were happening in real time, with some emotional sensations accompanying them. When he asked if she was ready, Rei responded affirmatively. Amiro positioned himself behind her, placing his fingers gently on either side of her head. Soon, Rei began to feel a haziness wash over her, as if she were walking through a fog. Faint sounds gradually grew louder, and a traditional Japanese home materialized before her. She moved closer, noticing a sliver of light peeking through a door. Curiosity led her to lean in and look inside. There, she saw a man with striking white hair shouting at a woman with pale blonde hair, who was crying. As she observed, a young girl with pale blonde hair and Rei's own facial features appeared, smiling at her and reaching for her hand. The girl urged Rei to come to her room to see a new toy. Despite her sister's excitement, Rei felt compelled to stay, worried about their mother's tears. However, the girl tugged at her hand, pulling her away. Memories began to flow together in chronological order. Rei saw herself as a small child, playing with her older sister, Misa, feeling the love and adoration she held for her. Their parents often fought, but Misa always managed to distract her. As Rei grew older, she began to understand the dynamics of her family. Their father was distant, having always wanted a son to take over his company, and in his eyes, his two daughters were a disappointment. Misa stepped into the role of caregiver, further strengthening their bond as sisters. Rei continued to witness more memories from her life, discovering her quirk, growing stronger, graduating from elementary school, and finally joining UA's hero course. She recalled studying in Class 1A, participating in exams and training sessions, all with the dream of becoming a great hero. She formed friendships with classmates, including Toshinori Yagi, the top student, and Enji Todoroki, though their paths diverged as Enji became increasingly obsessed with surpassing Toshinori. Eventually, Rei graduated from UA and joined an agency, adopting the hero name Ice Shard. However, her life took a turn for the worse. Her family dynamics deteriorated, and her father's irritability grew as his business struggled. Things escalated one night during a patrol when she confronted a formidable villain. Pushed to her limits, she unleashed her ice quirk to the extreme, resulting in her body becoming encased in frost. Although she defeated the villain, the consequences were dire. She suffered frostbite that damaged the nerves in her left hand, rendering her unable to control her quirk effectively. Uncontrollable quirk posed a significant risk in the field. This realization struck her hard. She understood that Enji sought her quirk to stabilize his own, and she recognized the symbiotic relationship between their abilities, her ice preventing their children from overheating, while Enji's flames protected against frostbite. This connection led her to ponder whether she and Enji were meant to be together. The psychological toll weighed heavily on Rei. Becoming a hero had been her lifelong ambition, and without control over her quirk, she felt lost, spiraling into a deep depression. Her vibrant spirit faded, leaving her quiet and withdrawn. Tragedy struck again when her beloved sister was killed in a villain attack. Consumed by guilt, Rei believed she could have prevented Misa's death had she still been a hero. The emotional turmoil caused her quirk to spiral out of control. In one incident, she unintentionally created massive ice spikes that damaged her surroundings and injured her father, instilling fear in her parents. Amid this chaos, Enji began sending marriage proposals, which she consistently rejected. He finally reached his limit and took the matter to her father, who quickly agreed when Enji offered to support his struggling business. In the end, she found herself compelled to marry him. The following years passed swiftly, but her married life was far from ideal. Enji was as cold and distant as her quirk. However, she experienced a glimpse of happiness when her son, Tuya, was born. She devoted herself to raising him, but when his quirk manifested, Enji was displeased. Tuya possessed a conflicting quirk. He had incredibly strong flames, but due to inheriting his mother's physique, he was vulnerable to his own fire. Whenever he used his quirk, he ended up hurting himself. In Enji's eyes, he was a disappointment, leading him to send Tuya away to a boarding school when Rei was 7 months pregnant with Fuyumi. She pleaded with Enji, crying and begging him not to send their son away, but he remained unmoved. That night, she held her baby boy close, fully aware that it would be a long time before she would see him again. Years passed, and her contact with Tuya became limited. Her mental state began to deteriorate as she watched 2 more of her beloved children suffer and be cast aside by Enji as if they were broken toys. Eventually, she found herself pregnant again. The months flew by, and Enji was absent throughout her pregnancy. Then, just a few weeks before her due date, a villain broke into their home, threatening her children. All she remembered was her quirk spiraling out of control as she tried to protect them, and then everything went dark. Rei slowly opened her eyes, her vision still blurry. She found herself in a pale mint room, sitting in front of a mahogany desk, and she burst into tears as a Miro gently patted her back, offering reassurance. Rei sat in her bedroom, still sobbing, her mind struggling to comprehend the hardships she had endured. Her head throbbed as she tried to organize her memories, grappling with the weight of 2 different lives, which only intensified her headache. Suddenly, she heard crying through the baby monitor. She quickly got up, her balance faltering from her haste, but she pushed through and made her way to the nursery to check on her youngest. When she arrived, her baby lay on his back, tears streaming down his face, his heterochromatic eyes fixed on her. She gently pulled him close, humming a soothing tune and rocking him softly until he began to drift back to sleep. Instead of putting him down, she carried him to the rocking chair by the window. How long had it been since she held him like this? She stroked his silky hair, reflecting on how nearly 3 weeks had passed since the chaos began, leaving her rushing between the hospital and Hisashi's bakery, with little time for her children. The only moments she caught a glimpse of them were fleeting mornings. Guilt churned in her stomach. She felt like a bad mother for neglecting her children. She should have been there to comfort them instead of spending hours in the park trying to escape her troubles. She realized she had been selfish, only thinking about her own feelings while her children were struggling. They had just begun to regain a semblance of normalcy when this turmoil struck. It must have traumatized them, especially Natsuo. Poor Natsuo. After everything that had happened with Enji, he was likely in distress, and instead of comforting him, she had completely overlooked his needs for weeks. She knew she had to make it up to them somehow, and she was determined to do so. With renewed vigor and confidence, she began to plan for the next day, focusing on how she would spend time with her children and make amends. The following day, despite being hit with a debilitating headache, she was on a mission and refused to give up. She woke up earlier than usual and started preparing breakfast, a challenging task given her headache, but the smiles her children gave her as they entered the room made it all worthwhile. She spent the entire day with her children, playing, watching movies, and chatting. For the first time in days, her headache faded away. She didn't know if it was the absence of stress or the medication she had taken, but in that moment, she was too busy with her children to care. Well into the afternoon, the house phone rang. The children were all asleep, exhausted from the day's activities. Even baby Shoto had spent the day giggling and smiling, truly a little angel. She rushed to the phone and quickly picked it up. "Hello. Rei-san, it's me. We have good news. Enji finally woke up." "Really?" she exclaimed, filled with joy. "Yes," he confirmed. "Can I come to the hospital to see him? I know visiting hours are over, but still. We can make an exception for you, Rei-san, but you'll have to hurry. Even though he woke up, we'll need to sedate him soon due to his condition." "Okay. I'll be there as fast as I can," she replied before hanging up. She quickly called her mother to share the news and then dashed out the door, racing toward the hospital. Her heart raced as she stood in front of the hospital room, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within her. Happiness, sadness, anxiety, and anger all collided, nearly overwhelming her. Taking a deep breath to calm her nerves, she opened the door. Enji sat on the hospital bed, pale and diminished. His once vibrant red hair had lost its luster, and he had lost significant weight. His eyes widened in surprise as he saw her enter, as if he wished to disappear into the mattress. Tears filled her eyes at the sight of him so broken. Without thinking, she rushed toward him, throwing herself into a tight embrace. His eyes widened further as she cried into his chest. After a moment, he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close and burying his face in her hair. She felt his tears soaking her neck, and his grip on her waist tightened. He whispered an apology, his voice cracking. She lost track of time as they remained in that position, his grip never loosening as he repeated his remorse like a mantra. She felt as if she were in a trance, absorbing his pain. Then he began to speak about how he had been a bad person, a bad father, a bad husband, a bad hero. He expressed that he didn't deserve to live. This broke her out of her trance, and anger surged within her. In a moment of impulse, she slapped him across the face. Enji looked at her in shock, his hand instinctively moving to his now red cheek, the imprint of her hand stark against his pale skin. She firmly told him not to dare say he didn't deserve to live. He insisted that he did, raising his voice as he recounted the selfish reasons behind his actions, how he had cast aside his children as if they were broken toys, and how he had emotionally hurt her throughout their marriage. He questioned how she could still say he deserved to stay. That was exactly why she insisted he needed to live. She shouted that despite his mistakes and the hurt he caused, he had a responsibility to correct his wrongs. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at his broken expression, declaring that he had to live to atone for his sins. She would not allow him to take the easy way out by giving up. They were going to start making things right together. He hesitantly asked if they were truly in this together. She emphasized the we, affirming that they would make things right because, given his track record, he would likely mess it up alone. She reminded him of her promise to stand by him in sickness and in health, smiling through her tears. Enji could only stare at her, tears streaming down his own face. A few days later, Enji was finally released from the hospital. He sat on the bed in dark pants and a maroon shirt, while Rei stood beside him, folding the spare clothing she had brought into a small bag. Her hair was pulled back in a high ponytail, and she wore a light pink sweater and white denim jeans. After that fateful day when he woke up, Rei had visited him every day, and they had grown comfortable with each other through their conversations. Though there was still some awkwardness, it felt good to connect. She had been sharing updates about their children when Dr. Rin entered the room. Dr. Rin greeted Enji, expressing his relief to see him up and ready to go home. Enji nodded in response. Before he left, Rin handed Rei a prescription for medication, instructing her to follow the instructions carefully due to Enji's condition. A slight change in timing could cause complications. Enji's head snapped up, meeting Ren's gaze as he firmly addressed him, discreetly glancing at Rei. Rin sighed, confirming that Rei was aware of Enji's condition. Enji protested, reminding Rin of their agreement and the contract that had been in place. Rin explained that he had no choice. Enji's life was at stake, and it was standard procedure to inform the family. He pointed out that Enji should have shared this information with Rei years ago. The tension escalated as Enji insisted on the importance of the contract, but Rin countered that it had been annulled the moment Enji had attempted to take his own life. They were about to argue further when Rei intervened, firmly telling them both to calm down. Enji looked surprised at her authoritative tone. She reminded Dr. Ren that shouting at patients was inappropriate and told Enji that he should have communicated this to her long ago. It was time for them to go home. Enji, crossing his arms defiantly, mentioned the possibility of legal action against Ren. Ren, trying to maintain a serious demeanor, challenged him with a smirk. Rei smiled at the two of them, and after signing several papers, they finally left the hospital. The car ride home was filled with an awkward silence. Rei noticed Enji's tension as he sat beside her, his knuckles white from gripping the seat. Gently, she placed her hand over his, softly clasping it to offer comfort. All Enji did was hold her hand tighter. He stood at the front door, feeling an unfamiliar anxiety about entering his own home. Panic bubbled within him as he considered the consequences of stepping inside. He had never felt so vulnerable in his life. Usually, he wore a mask of courage and anger, but after everything that had happened, he didn't feel like putting that facade back on. He understood that to be a good father, he needed to embrace his true self, even if it meant showing weakness. Rei approached him slowly and took his hand, guiding him across the threshold. She announced their arrival, and soon he heard the sound of little feet racing through the house. Fuyumi and Natsuo burst into the room, calling out for their mother, their eyes sparkling with joy at seeing her. They seemed so grown up, and Enji couldn't recall the last time he had seen his children. A smile spread across his face, but it quickly faded as he noticed their reaction to him. The children stiffened and fell silent, though Fuyumi managed to squeak out a hesitant welcome. Guilt washed over him as he saw the fear in their eyes, but he was determined to make things right. He greeted them softly, and their eyes widened in surprise at his gentle demeanor. Fuyumi sensed that things had changed. At first, she was confused by the rapid shifts in their lives, but she was too happy to dwell on it. Her mother was brave and cheerful again, and she enjoyed spending time with her new baby brother and Natsuo. However, after a fight with their father, Mama had suddenly disappeared, and Fuyumi feared things might revert to how they once were. Fortunately, Mama returned to her cheerful self after a few days. Fuyumi was unsettled by her father's extended absence. He would usually be gone for a few days or a week, but this time felt different. When he finally appeared in the entryway with Mama, she was genuinely surprised. What astonished her even more was when he smiled at her. She couldn't remember the last time he had smiled, and it filled her with warmth. Mama guided them into the house, promising a treat, and took father upstairs, saying he needed to rest. Natsuo, too young to notice, didn't see that their father looked different, paler and thinner. But Fuyumi noticed everything. Later, she sat in her room, drawing the changing scenery as winter approached, her favorite season. Just as she was lost in her artwork, she heard a knock on the door. When she called for the person to enter, she nearly fell out of her chair in surprise as father walked in. He sat beside her on the bed and admired her drawing. He complimented her, and she felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Soon, she found herself animatedly discussing her art and the colors she had chosen. Her father continued to encourage her, and she even pulled out her album to show him her previous works. Spending time with him filled her with warmth and happiness, especially when she made him laugh. In that moment, she realized that everything around them was changing rapidly, but it was changing for the better. On the path to becoming a better father, Enji took on a more active role in the household, one of which was becoming the family storyteller. Every night, he would read Fuyumi and Natsuo stories before bed. One Tuesday evening in the Todoroki household, they finished dinner and were enjoying a treat. Little Shoto was already in bed, and Rei was busy with laundry, moving from room to room. When she reached Fuyumi's room, she remembered that, despite being such a sweet girl, Fuyumi didn't like fairy tales, claiming they were too unrealistic. Enji was taken aback. He had read that storytelling was an important part of being a good father, and he felt he couldn't skip this step. Miraculously, Fuyumi loved Enji's stories. She didn't question why, but as she was about to enter her room, she overheard something that nearly made her faint. And then the ravens began to claw out the evil sister's eyes. Rei was about to enter when she heard something even more alarming that made her jaw drop. Fuyumi laughed and declared that it wasn't a fairy tale. This incident led to Enji being lectured about what was appropriate for children and being banned from reading any more stories unless they were child-friendly and approved by Rei. "This is not a fairy tale, Enji," Rei exclaimed. "But the brothers Grimm wrote fairy tales," he protested. "Well, they're not suitable for children." After that unfortunate incident, Rei left the two upstairs. Fuyumi had fallen asleep, and Enji sulked about his stories. As Rei headed to the laundry room, she heard a loud thump. Worried, she rushed to find Natsuo lying on the floor in front of the stairs. "Natsuo, how did you fall, sweetheart?" she asked, rubbing his swollen knee. "I was trying to fly, Mama," he replied. He expressed his confusion about flying, questioning why someone would attempt it without a flying quirk. He insisted that flying was possible with fairy dust, just like in the stories their father told. He pointed at his hands, which were covered in glitter from Fuyumi's craft kit, and upon closer inspection, she noticed that his clothes and hair were also sprinkled with the same sparkly substance. She smiled weakly as she explained that fairy dust wasn't real. He vehemently disagreed, claiming their father had said it was. This led to a discussion about distinguishing reality from fiction and the importance of thinking things through before acting. She emphasized that believing everything one hears in stories could lead to trouble, advising him not to jump from the stairs anymore. Natsuo stood silently, deep in thought. Just as she was about to leave, she caught him whispering to himself about needing to try again with more fairy dust, his determination evident. In response to his antics, she declared that their father was officially banned from telling the kids stories. Rei felt a strong urge to escape the confines of her home. While she cherished her children and appreciated Enji's involvement with them, the endless movie nights and craft days had begun to feel stifling. She longed for fresh air and some time to herself. With determination, she set aside a Sunday afternoon, carefully writing instructions for her family and sharing happy hugs before finally stepping out of the house after weeks of confinement. As she walked toward the park, a familiar cafe caught her eye, flooding her with nostalgia. Memories of discovering the cafe, savoring its rose tea and chiffon cakes, and becoming a regular patron washed over her. She entered the cafe, greeted by the rich aroma of coffee and a sweet lemony scent. Just as she was about to find a seat, someone called out to her. Rei turned to see Sana, a petite young girl who worked as a waitress at the cafe. With her strawberry blonde hair styled in a cute bun and braids, tan skin, and mischievous green eyes, Sana had always been a friendly face during Rei's visits. Rei smiled as she recalled their previous conversations. Sana led her to a cozy nook in the back, surrounded by various plants that provided a sense of privacy. Rei settled into her usual spot and ordered her favorite, lemon rose tea and chiffon cake. As she sat there, a wave of nostalgia washed over her, bringing back memories of visiting the cafe with her children. One child, in particular, filled her thoughts. Tuya. They used to come here together at least twice a week, escaping the chaos at home. She remembered him sitting across from her, enjoying cheesecake, and how he had initially scrunched his face in distaste at the tea, only to eventually grow fond of it. Realizing how long it had been since she last contacted him pained her. 6 months had passed without a word. Normally, She sent him care packages each month, accompanied by a letter, and he would always respond with a simple thank you note. Determined to reconnect, she decided to write him a letter and include something special. Calling a waitress over, she purchased a tourist card and began to write. She started her letter, addressing it to Tuya and explaining how much time had passed since her last correspondence. She shared that she had lost her memories but was doing well now. She introduced his new little brother, Shoto, describing his striking dual-colored hair and heterochromia. Just as she was about to share more, she noticed a boy standing nearby, holding a cup of tea. He appeared to be a teenager, with black hair and a full-sleeve turtleneck. Bandages adorned his face and hands, but it was his blue eyes that struck her as familiar. He awkwardly asked if the seat was taken, and Rei noticed the cafe was bustling with customers. Welcomed him to sit. The boy offered a shy smile as he took a seat across from her. They sipped their tea in silence until Rei decided to break the ice by asking about his age. He replied that he was 13 and explained that he often came to the cafe alone since his house was just across the street and his father knew the staff. Their conversation flowed easily, and the boy inquired about the letter she was writing. When she mentioned it was for her oldest son, Tuya, he seemed genuinely surprised. Curious, he asked why she wrote to him, and Rei explained that Tuya was at a boarding school and she wanted to keep him updated on life at home, even if he didn't respond often. The boy's reaction shifted when he learned that Tuya didn't write back. Rei offered him some water, reassuring him that she continued to write because she loved him. The boy then asked why she had sent him to a boarding school, questioning if there were better options available. Rei's expression turned serious as she recounted her husband's insistence on the decision, expressing her deep regret over it. The boy fell silent, seemingly lost in thought. Suddenly he stood up, surprising Rei. He looked into her eyes, gulping nervously, and apologized for needing to leave. As he stepped away, Rei called out to him, wanting to know his name. Rei introduced herself, hoping to see the boy again. His eyes widened, and he hesitated for a moment before taking a deep breath, as if to steady himself. He finally revealed his name, Dabi, before rushing out the door, leaving a stunned Rei behind. Tears streamed down her face, landing on the letter she had forgotten. Rei felt an overwhelming sense of confusion. Dabi was not supposed to exist. He was meant to be Tuya, her beloved son. He should have been at a distant boarding school, not wandering around as a potential villain. The reality of the situation baffled her. How could he have transformed from Tuya to Dabi in just 6 months? It didn't make sense. As she made her way home, her mind raced with questions. She needed to investigate delicately. Something had triggered Tuya's departure, but she was unaware of what it was. She had to be cautious. If anyone suspected her intentions, it could lead to exposing Tuya and the League of Villains. The memories of the future were hazy, and she couldn't pinpoint when Tuya would join that organization. Extra caution was necessary. The very next day, she began her investigation. Drawing from her knowledge of crime novels and documentaries, she understood that one mistake could lead to disaster. She created several fake email accounts to keep her activities hidden, knowing that if someone hacked her main account, it would raise suspicions. She spread her inquiries across various encrypted accounts. In her previous life, she had been a computer science major, so she was well-versed in technology. Days passed as she spent time at the cafe where she had seen her son, but there were no signs of him. It wasn't until she brought Shoto with her that Dabi finally appeared. She observed him closely, noting how he tensed upon seeing her. She smiled and invited him over, watching as his eyes sparkled with wonder at the baby in her lap. They began to meet occasionally, during which she asked him vague questions about his family. He didn't find anything suspicious, believing her questions were casual. Little did he know, she had carefully selected those questions to gauge his reactions. Discussions about family stirred heavy emotions in him: sadness and tension when his mother was mentioned, contrasting sharply with the anger and resentment that surfaced when his father was brought up. Rei longed to pull him into her embrace, to ask about his life over the years, why he hadn't reached out, and most importantly, why he had chosen the path of a villain. But now was not the time, and certainly not in the bustling cafe. Next, she decided to focus on Enji, who had contact with Tuya. There was no way Tuya could have left under Enji's watch without him knowing something. She needed to determine whether Enji was aware of the truth or completely in the dark. She planned to exploit the similarities between Enji and Tuya's quirks. She had observed that whenever they were hiding something, they exhibited the same signs: tense shoulders and twitching fingers, which they attempted to conceal by tapping their thighs. She would use this knowledge to question Enji and uncover the truth. Rei felt a mix of determination and anxiety as she prepared for her next steps. She was committed to finding out what had happened to her son and why he had changed so drastically. The journey ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to face whatever it took to uncover the truth. He wanted his siblings to know him. He still came crawling back because he loved her deeply and longed for a real, loving family. Rei had been planning this for a few days. She knew she wanted answers and needed them quickly. The sooner she knew, the sooner she could plan to save her son. That night, after getting ready for bed, she waited for Enji to return after tucking the kids in, and then she made her move. Rei expressed the need to talk, clutching the satin-white sheets of their bed. She felt the mattress dip as Enji's large frame settled beside her, signaling her to continue. She noticed him tense at her words. She began to share her thoughts, turning toward him with a slight smile, suggesting they should bring Tuya home. She could see him stiffen, his shoulders becoming rigid. She continued, mentioning that their family had improved and that there was no reason to leave Tuya alone. She even found a good school nearby that could accommodate him. But Enji interrupted her, his tension palpable as he stood up. Surprised, she watched as he knelt in front of her, taking her hands and squeezing them lightly. His voice broke as he prepared to share something important. He revealed that something had happened years ago, something he had kept from her. As he spoke, she felt a wave of confusion and fear wash over her. Enji's trembling shoulders and warm hands indicated the weight of his words. He confessed that he couldn't save Tuya, and as he looked into her eyes, she saw the depth of his remorse and sadness. It was a look she had never seen before, even after his own struggles. Rei tried to reassure him, insisting that Tuya was safe at the boarding school. But Enji shook his head, looking more defeated than she had ever seen him. He explained that years ago, when she had just given birth to Natsu, he had hidden the truth from her due to her fragile state. He recounted a devastating fire that had burned everything, and despite his desperate search, he had been unable to find Tuya. Tears streamed down his face as he clutched her hands tightly. Rei felt a chilling dread settle in her stomach. Anger surged within her, mixed with an overwhelming sadness. How could he have kept something so monumental from her? The loss of their child was unbearable, and she felt as if grief had struck her like a truck. Yet, a part of her remained rational, reminding her that Tuya was alive. She had just had tea with him the day before. But to Enji, Tuya was gone, lost for years. He believed he had failed as a father, and seeing him tremble before her, tears flowing, ignited a determination within her. She confronted him, her voice cold as she cupped his face, forcing him to look up at her. She expressed her anger and hurt over his decision to hide their son's supposed death. While she understood that he had acted out of concern for her well-being, she could not forgive him for keeping such a significant truth from her. She reassured him that he should not blame himself for what had happened, acknowledging the tragedy of the fire. But she made it clear that she would never forgive him for the silence surrounding their son's fate. She smiled bitterly as frost began to form on her fingertips, the air inside the room turning bone-chillingly cold as fog started to emanate from her body. Enji couldn't bring himself to meet her steely gaze. The following day, the family gathered to create a tomb for their lost member. A grief-stricken father, a stoic mother, and two siblings mourned for the brother they had never known. Here lies Tuya Todoroki, a loving brother and a good son. A soul taken too early. A person's childhood defines their future character. The morals learned, the love received, and the trauma experienced all contribute to shaping who one becomes. However, not everyone is bound by their past. Some possess the strength to overcome it, while others do not. With this philosophy in mind, Rei raised her children over the next 15 years. She never imagined she would find herself in this position again, a mother of 3. Yet, somehow, everything worked out. Her relationship with NG was strained during the initial years. They navigated their interactions carefully, learning to compromise and move forward. Time indeed heals wounds, but the scars remain painful reminders of the past that also serve as triggers for growth and strength, ensuring that mistakes are not repeated. Rei had come to forgive NG, recognizing that he had transformed into a genuinely good man and father who loved his children. She recalled his pride when Fuyumi excelled in an art contest, when Natsuo learned to ride a bike independently, and when Shoto first called him Dada instead of father. Despite witnessing NG's love and dedication to their children, teaching them to be strong and independent, Rei struggled to fully forgive him for what had happened to her eldest son. Life had been good, but after the family mourned Tuya, the atmosphere in the household grew somber, and silence enveloped them. To break the tension, she accepted Hisashi's offer and arranged a playdate. With Fuyumi attending her new art class and NG coaching Natsuo in soccer, Rei and baby Shoto headed to the Midoriya household. Shoto and Izuku connected immediately. Initially, it was a bit awkward. The usually quiet Shoto watched as the cheerful Izuku rolled around in his all-might onesie. However, they soon found ways to play together, sharing giggles that warmed Rei's heart. The real excitement began when baby Katsuki joined the group. He quickly snatched the all-might plushie from Izuku's hands, causing the little boy to cry. Shoto, ever the hero, could not bear to see his friend upset. With surprising fierceness, he took back the toy and shouted, "No." The room fell silent, and Rei thought that was likely NG's influence showing. Suddenly, it erupted into a playful battle. An irate Katsuki tackled a startled Shoto, leading to a tug-of-war as they rolled around, shouting. Even baby Izuku joined in, trying to help Shoto. This marked the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Rei realized just how much had changed. Izuku still had his father, and NG had become a good dad. Izuku had not lost his confidence despite not having a quirk. While he felt disheartened, he now had a solid support system. Katsuki no longer bullied Izuku. Instead, Shoto defended him and encouraged bravery. There were occasional teasing remarks, but it was not outright bullying. Both friends, along with their father, assured Izuku that a quirk was not everything and that anyone could be a hero. Unexpectedly, the best support came from Endeavor himself. NG had returned to hero work with renewed determination and quickly reclaimed his position as the number 2 hero, now beloved and trusted. Izuku found inspiration in NG's presence, who assured him that even without a quirk, he could become a hero. It was the drive to help and protect others that defined a true hero. Consequently, Izuku enrolled in a martial arts course to learn various forms and was invited to train alongside Katsuki and Shoto, marking the start of a beautiful rivalry. However, not everything had changed. Shoto still bore a scar, a reminder of an incident from when he was 5. In his eagerness to help Rei, he had tried to lift a boiling pot from the stove. Climbing onto a stool, he lost his balance, and the pot fell, causing an accident that led to a noticeable scar around his eyes. Rei had cried upon seeing his once flawless skin marked, realizing that despite her efforts to change everything, she was not omnipotent, and some things were simply meant to be. Now, as she drove down the highway with Shoto beside her, she noticed how tense he was, his fingers fidgeting. She smiled and remarked that it was finally the day. Shoto responded with a distracted acknowledgement, gazing out the window. Rei reminded him that he didn't have to take the admission exam since he had received a recommendation. Yet, Shoto insisted on proving himself, not wanting to rely on his father's reputation. He felt that with Izuku and Katsuki participating, he had to earn his place. Upon arriving at UA, Rei offered Shoto one last chance to reconsider. He simply nodded in response. She playfully noted that she preferred him as a younger child, a happy little boy full of sunshine, rather than the brooding teenager he had become. With a chuckle, she watched as Shoto ran off, his face flushed. As she continued her journey, home was not her destination. Instead, she headed to her favorite coffee shop. Greeting the familiar faces inside, she noticed that while the cafe was bustling, her usual seat was occupied by just one person. She made her way to him slowly and sat down in front of the man. It had been a while since they last saw each other, and he nodded, his eyes filled with relief and happiness. She noticed the bandages on his face and remarked on how hard he had been working. Concerned, she told him he should be more careful, as he had been getting hurt a lot. Taking his calloused hand, she traced the scars and burns that marred his skin. With a smile, she asked how he had been doing. He replied that he was fine, but she could see through his monotone response. She pointed out the dark bags under his eyes and questioned whether he had been eating and resting properly. He insisted he was fine, his cheeks turning red as he tried to look away. She chuckled at his embarrassment, reminding him that as his mother, it was her job to take care of him, even if he was an adult now. She expressed her disapproval of his piercings, noting that while a little ear or lip piercing might have been acceptable, the numerous piercings on his face were excessive. He defended his choices, claiming they were cool, but she continued to argue that there were better ways to express teenage rebellion. He promised he wouldn't do anything like that again without her permission, but she playfully warned him that he might end up with full-body tattoos and smoking regularly. He pleaded to change the subject, and she agreed, sharing her thoughts on how many angsty teenage boys she had encountered, including his brother Shoto and even sweet little Natsu, who had thankfully come to his senses. It felt nice to act casually, just like old times, and as she reminisced, Tuya's expression softened. When she shifted the conversation to his plans, her demeanor became serious. He straightened up, his relaxed posture gone. He explained that everything was going according to plan. He had been building a reputation for himself, which had worked as bait, and he had received an invitation from the League of Villains. She nodded, pulling out a stack of papers and sliding them across the table to him. As he skimmed through the documents, she informed him that the board had agreed to send him in, and she and Amiro-san would be his handlers. Once he signed the papers, the mission would officially begin. She cautioned him to be very careful about his actions, as the board had only agreed because investigations suggested the League might become a future threat. They needed him to be their man on the inside. She emphasized that he could not be caught by the League or other heroes. Only a select few knew about the mission, and if he was caught by authorities, they would not be able to rescue him without raising suspicion. With the training he had received, she believed he could keep his emotions in check and not show hesitation when committing to his new role. He was no longer Rei Todoroki, he was Dabi, the scorned son of the number 2 hero Endeavor. He harbored a deep resentment towards heroes because of what his father had done to him. His ultimate goal was the destruction of Endeavor and his legacy, and the League was merely a stepping stone to achieve that. She urged him to remember this and imprint it in his mind. She informed him that their meetings would not be as frequent, suggesting they meet once every 4 months. From her purse, she pulled out a small bag and explained its contents. Inside were essential items, including a map of rendezvous spots that he needed to memorize and then destroy to avoid leaving a paper trail. There was also a piercing that served as a GPS and panic button. If he found himself in danger from the League, he could press the button to alert officers and heroes in the area. She advised him to change the position of the piercing daily to avoid detection. If he discovered important information, he needed to inform them immediately. Inside the bag was a list of websites that appeared normal at first glance. By using his code in the discount bar, he would be redirected to a secure site that left no virtual footprint for submitting reports. Thanks to his eidetic memory, he had an advantage as he would be harder to track without a permanent code. Tuya received a list of time codes each time he met an officer in person. They had done everything possible to ensure his safety while he investigated undercover. That was all he needed to know. Now, he just had to sign the papers. He picked up the pen and signed, expressing that there were safer ways to right wrongs. However, he felt he had to do this. He had made mistakes that haunted him, and he couldn't rest knowing how his choices had affected others. This was his only chance at redemption, and his determination was evident. His mother, May, masked her emotions as she took the signed papers and secured them in her locked bag. She welcomed him to the CIA, and he shook her hand, looking directly into her eyes. When she arrived home, she announced her presence and placed her shoes neatly. Fuyumi greeted her from the kitchen, and the atmosphere was filled with excitement as the Todoroki family gathered to celebrate Shoto's acceptance into UA. Although the results weren't out yet, they all believed in Shoto's success. Yet, amidst the joy, she felt a heavy guilt. Tuya should have been there, celebrating with family instead of undercover as a villain infiltrating a dangerous organization. It was her fault. If only she could have convinced him otherwise. The signing of the papers was merely a formality. He couldn't back out after being exposed to secrets and trained for that role. She followed the enticing aroma of Fuyumi's broth into the kitchen. Cooking for the family was a challenge, as Fuyumi and Shoto preferred cold foods without spice, while Enji favored spicy dishes. Only Natsuo and she had neutral tastes, making it difficult to find meals everyone enjoyed. Seeing her family relaxed brought her joy. Fuyumi was busy at the stove while Shoto set the table, casting annoyed glares at Natsuo, who was distracted by Enji's explanation of the stock market. This domestic scene warmed her heart. She sat beside Enji, who greeted her with a smile before returning to his conversation with Natsuo, who feigned interest while ignoring Shoto's glares. They all gathered to say their prayers before diving into the meal. Fuyumi asked Shoto about the exam, and he replied that it went well. Natsuo chimed in, boasting about Shoto's performance and the shocked expression on Bakugo's face when he saw the scoreboard. Enji reminded Natsuo to chew with his mouth closed, and Natsuo sheepishly rubbed the back of his head. Enji expressed his pride in Shoto, who nodded, a hint of red on his cheeks. As they continued their banter, she felt a pang of sadness. She imagined Tuya sitting in the empty sixth seat at the table, smiling and engaging with his siblings. The thought brought tears to her eyes. Shoto noticed her distress, causing everyone at the table to look her way. Fuyumi appeared surprised, Natsuo seemed ready to panic, and even Enji looked concerned. She chuckled softly as Enji gently squeezed her hand, prompting her to explain her feelings. She wanted to express her wish for Tuya to be there but instead opted for a lighter comment about how all her children were growing up, even Shoto entering high school. She wiped her eyes with a handkerchief, and everyone relaxed. Fuyumi reassured her that even as they grew up, they would always be her babies. Natsuo playfully pointed out Shoto's youthful appearance, which earned him a glare. Suddenly, Natsuo yelped in pain after Shoto playfully retaliated, leading to a light-hearted argument between the brothers. Fuyumi intervened, reminding Natsuo to act his age and admonishing Shoto for resorting to violence. The next day, she meditated in the courtyard while Enji and Shoto practiced sparring. Over the years, she had relearned how to use her quirk. After research on the children's DNA and quirks, doctors found a cure for Enji's disease. During his treatment, Enji and the kids encouraged her to try it as well, a decision she felt was the best she had ever made. She vividly recalled the exhilaration of forming ice again, the chill coursing through her veins as frost formed in her hands. It was a beautiful sensation, one she had missed for too long. Months later, during their monthly tea sessions, she learned from Hisashi that Amiro-san worked for the CIA, monitoring for signs of the League of Villains. This inspired her to train for an application, realizing that as a CIA agent, she could influence events in ways Rei Todoroki could not. Through these training sessions, Enji and Rei grew closer, both relearning their quirks, though Rei was progressing more rapidly. In the early stages of her training, she struggled to control her powers, but with time, she found her footing. This caused her to accidentally inflict frostbite, leading her to frequently call Enji, who had trained at the dojo, to come thaw the ice. Eventually, they both decided it was better to train together. Their training sessions were always exhausting. They sparred using hand-to-hand combat and their quirks. Enji was taller and more muscular, so training with him often left her sore. Ice and puddles scattered across the training yard, with the occasional bush on fire. The clash of ice and fire created a steamy atmosphere. It was during one particularly steamy session that, for the first time in years, Enji and Rei found themselves in a close situation that made her blush deeply when she thought about it. But now, she had no time to waste. The canon had already started, and it was time to focus on the future. She had a family to protect, and there was no room for error. Rei walked through the halls of UA, nostalgia flooding her thoughts. She had decided to take actions that would drastically change the storyline, placing herself in the midst of everything to protect those she cared about. Unknown to most of the public and heroes alike, Nizu, the principal of UA, was part of the CIA. He led the organization that influenced and trained future heroes, a position of great power that not just anyone could hold. As she walked through the hallways, she recalled all the nooks and crannies. UA had been renovated, and while it looked more modern, the layout remained the same. She frowned at that. Anyone could infiltrate the school and have a permanent map of UA. Even the classroom numbers were unchanged, which was something that definitely needed to change. She knocked on the giant doors of the principal's office and entered the room, where Nizu greeted her cheerfully and invited her to sit down. He remarked on the fine morning, and she returned the greeting, inquiring if he had received her reports. Nizu confirmed he had seen her lesson plans for strategy and planning, praising them, especially for surprise invasions. However, he questioned whether they were too advanced for first-year students. Rei explained that it was essential to start from the beginning, as the first years were still teens who didn't fully grasp the dangers of their roles. She believed it was crucial to hone their situational awareness and planning skills, which would help them improve over the years. It would also teach them teamwork and the fact that being a hero wasn't solely about fighting. Sometimes, strategic withdrawal was necessary. Nizu smiled, expressing his confidence that she would make a good teacher. After leaving the office, she made her way to the teacher's room, surprised to find only a handful of people present. Present Mike, always hyperactive, greeted her enthusiastically. Only Toshinori, Aizawa, Midnight, and Present Mike were there. Aizawa was in a corner, wrapped in his iconic yellow sleeping bag, while Midnight poked him with a stick, the source of which was a mystery. Rei greeted Present Mike, emphasizing the urgency of sending out acceptance letters, as the deadline was that very day. He panicked, rushing toward the stack of letters piled on his desk, which made her chuckle. She took a seat and greeted Toshinori, who sat next to her. She still couldn't believe how a man who had once towered over her had become so small, but his smile still sparkled, and his blonde hair retained its shine. He confirmed that he had sent out his letters, and she noted that he had recorded a video with special care, asking how he knew Izuku Midoriya. Toshinori appeared to panic slightly, claiming he and Midoriya went way back. Rei, knowing the truth, mentioned that she had known Midoriya since he was a baby and that he was good friends with her son. She observed Toshinori sweating as he began to panic further. She pointed out that according to Shoto, Midoriya had used a quirk during the exams, despite having always been quirkless in her experience, finding it suspicious. Toshinori's voice squeaked in response, and he quickly excused himself, claiming he had to retrieve his outfit from the laundry before rushing out the door. Rei enjoyed teasing him. For the next few hours, she focused on her paperwork, amused by Toshinori's blatant attempts to avoid her. While All Might was the charismatic symbol of peace, Toshinori Yagi was quite the dork. At the end of a productive workday, she was welcomed by the delicious aroma of food cooking. She called out to Fuyumi, reminding her that she had promised to cook dinner. Fuyumi smiled, explaining that she had returned sooner than expected and decided to take over the cooking, pouting slightly. Rei found it hard to resist pinching her cheeks. Despite being a fully grown adult in her final year of college, Fuyumi was still incredibly adorable. Rei settled in the living room, where Natsuo and Shoto were lying on the floor, engrossed in a video game. She bet her favorite handbag that a fight would break out soon. And just as she had predicted, it happened not even 5 minutes later. Looking over, she saw that Shoto had won the game and was smirking down at Natsuo, who was scowling. Natsuo accused Shoto of cheating, and Shoto simply responded with a nonchalant grunt, a smirk still on his face. Sometimes, Rei thought her son might be an Uchiha in disguise. Maybe Enji was too. After all, Shoto had inherited that rather annoying speech quirk from him. Natsuo, frustrated, jumped on Shoto, and soon they were rolling around on the floor, pulling at each other's hair. Rei sighed. She was too tired for this. It was hard to believe they were both in college and high school, respectively. They only stopped when Fuyumi threatened them, swinging a soup ladle back and forth as she scolded them. At times, Rei looked at her children and saw an angry Urza threatening Natsu and Gray with a sword. She missed Fairy Tail. When she had passed away, the final season was still in production. At least she had read the manga and knew how the story ended, or she would have been in tears on the floor right now. Now that she thought about it, Shoto and Natsuo could also be compared to Naruto and Sasuke, which made Fuyumi Sakura. She figured she could be Yamato, and considering Tuya's lack of people skills, he could pass as Sai. Did that make Enji Kakashi? The thought of Enji with spiky, gravity-defying hair, a mask, and an iconic orange book made her almost laugh. Speaking of masks, perhaps she should get some for the family. The air in Tokyo was becoming polluted, and it seemed like a good idea. It wasn't as if there would ever be an outbreak of a newly discovered virus targeting respiratory organs, causing a pandemic that forced people to stay quarantined and wear masks when going out. That was just preposterous, right? Even though she had been over 70 in her previous life, she had never shied away from watching anime. This ensured that, unlike her husband, she had plenty to talk about with her grandchildren, earning the title of coolest grandma in the world, according to her 7-year-old granddaughter. To distract herself, she helped Fuyumi set the table, or else she would have sulked about the lack of good anime in this world. During dinner, they all discussed Shoto starting school while Enji was at the agency doing a night shift. Shoto sighed, hoping everything would go smoothly, as it would be troublesome otherwise. Rei couldn't help but think he sounded just like Shikamaru. But she knew he was in for a surprise. Everything was bound to be anything but smooth. As they prepared for the day, Shoto expressed his panic about her accompanying him to school. He insisted he could go on his own, but Rei playfully reminded him of their earlier antics over the last cookie, which had led to their wrestling match on the floor. Shoto's face flushed red as he defended himself, claiming it was Natsuo's fault for taking the cookie despite knowing it was his. Rei smirked at him, teasing him about being embarrassed to be seen with his frail, old mother. Shoto insisted she could drop him off at the corner, but she playfully refused, reminding him of his strength and how he sparred with Endeavor, the number 2 hero. As they parked in front of the school, Shoto looked ready to bolt, but Rei held the locks, ensuring he couldn't escape. She feigned sweetness, asking if she should come along. Shoto insisted he could manage on his own and urged her to go to work. Rei mentioned having cookies in her bag for his homeroom teacher, wanting to ensure her baby was taken care of. Before she could finish her thought, Shoto dashed out of the car. She had opened the locks mid-rant, showing him mercy on his first day of school. As he rushed into the building, checking to make sure she wasn't following him, Rei felt the joys of motherhood torture by embarrassment, a fitting payback for the sleepless nights and diaper changes. She turned her car around, parking in the staff lot, and made her way to the teacher's room. Inside, only Tashinori and Aizawa were present. Aizawa was wrapped up in his iconic yellow sleeping bag, trying to avoid her gaze. Rei greeted Tashinori, chuckling as she watched him attempt to sink deeper into his seat to escape her. It was amusing to see him squirm, especially after their previous conversation about Izuku. Rei took the opportunity to engage Aizawa, playfully dragging him across the floor toward the classroom. It was quite a sight, a cheerful and smiling Rei pulling Aizawa, who looked like a giant worm in his sleeping bag. As they approached the classroom, Rei noticed Izuku, Uraraka, and Ida standing outside, talking. Aizawa took that moment to wiggle out of his sleeping bag, reminding them that this was the hero course in his husky voice. If she weren't married, she might have considered making a move on him, but Enji was definitely more handsome now that Aizawa wasn't a steroid-pumped gorilla, or was it a chimpanzee? As Aizawa continued to scold the students, Izuku finally noticed Rei standing in the corner. He squeaked her name, surprised to see her. Rei playfully glared at him, reminding him that it was quite an accomplishment for him to notice her, considering he had been avoiding her for weeks. Izuku stammered, insisting he hadn't been trying to avoid her, his eyes wide with surprise. He was acting just like Tashinori, which explained why her son thought they were related. She asked him what he was doing there, and he hesitated before addressing her as Auntie. She gently reminded him that it would be unprofessional to call her that since she was his sensei. Just as he was about to respond, the bell rang, interrupting him. She smiled and said they should head inside, noting that his mother would be disappointed if he was late on his first day. With that, she entered the classroom, leaving the stunned trio behind. As she stepped into the class, everyone fell silent. Shoto looked at her with a mix of horror, and even Katsuki seemed taken aback. Katsuki shouted in disbelief, questioning her presence. She quickly reminded him to watch his language and use his inside voice, referencing a past Thanksgiving incident that silenced him. Ah, the Thanksgiving of 2019, what a memorable day. Before Shoto could react, Aizawa entered, prompting everyone to take their seats. The class began with introductions. Rei Todoroki introduced herself as the teacher for strategy and planning, playfully mentioning her relation to the brooding boy in the back. She warned any potential suitors that they would need her permission first, which drew laughter from the class, especially from Katsuki, while Shoto felt utterly mortified, trying to hide his face. As the class progressed, Rei noticed Bakugo still laughing at Shoto, who was glaring at her but surprisingly engaged in conversation with Momo. She made a mental note of that more material for future teasing. Then Aizawa dropped a bombshell that sent panic through the students, particularly Izuku, who looked ready to faint. As they walked toward the fields, Shoto confronted her, demanding to know why she had done that and when she had become a sensei. Some students glanced back but quickly turned away, intimidated by the combined glare of mother and son. Rei calmly told Shoto to relax, explaining that her career choices were hers to make, including embarrassing him during his formative years. He protested, looking as if he might pull his hair out. She reminded him that it was Rei-sensei to him and urged him to hurry so he wouldn't be late for the test. As they walked, she decided to tease him one last time, asking about the girl he had been talking to, wiggling her eyebrows. Shoto was taken aback, asking what girl. She mentioned Momo, joking about how quickly he was moving, but then she playfully questioned whether he even knew how babies were born, suggesting he might need a lesson. Flustered, Shoto dashed away, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. Anime logic, she never quite understood how that worked indoors. But now it was time to have some fun with the 20 students in her class. Rei arrived at the classroom, feeling frustrated about the scheduling mix-up caused by Present Mic. She had intended to teach the students about strategy before their battle simulation, but now she was stuck with the afternoon class. Midnight tried to cheer her up, pointing out that the students were bound to make mistakes, which would give her a chance to teach them the importance of planning. As she entered Class 1A, she greeted the students enthusiastically, causing them to look bewildered. Aizawa, in his usual manner, complained about the disruption. Rei, feeling playful, kicked him lightly, sending him out the window while playfully shouting a reference to her favorite character. This incident did nothing to help her reputation for being allegedly crazy, and she soon found herself in front of Principal Nizu for disciplinary action. Nizu expressed his disapproval, but Rei argued that Aizawa had copied her favorite character. This led to a lively discussion about Naruto, and by the end of it, Nizu found himself intrigued by the series. Their conversation continued, and Rei cleverly negotiated her way out of trouble by promising to finish the story before dealing with any consequences. Thus, she managed to escape punishment while sharing her enthusiasm for her favorite show. Rei was practically jumping with excitement when her class came around. She had a plan to engage the students and spread her message of Reism. After a brief encounter with Nizu, who seemed overwhelmed by the revelations she shared, she made her way to Ground B, where All Might was conducting the Hero Basic Training class. She remembered that combat training was on the agenda, and with teams A and D featuring Midoriya, Achiko, Tenya, and Katsuki, she saw a perfect opportunity to win over the students. As the students gathered in the projection room to watch the match between teams A and D, Rei greeted them enthusiastically. She acknowledged that her earlier impression might not have been the best, but she was determined to make amends. Pulling out a giant box from her bag, she offered cookies to the students, watching as their expressions shifted from nervousness to delight at the enticing aroma. The cookies were a hit, with Mina exclaiming that it was the best cookie she had ever tasted. Rei felt a sense of triumph. Her plan to bribe the students with cookies was working perfectly. She knew the power of her baked goods and how they could sway hearts and minds. The recipes for her cookies, brownies, and cheesecakes were closely guarded secrets, known only to her and Fuyumi. As she continued to distribute cookies, her eyes sparkled when she reached Denki Kaminari, who resembled a cheerful Pikachu. She resisted the urge to hug him and instead offered him a cookie, delighting in his reaction. Denki was thrilled and eagerly accepted another cookie, repeating the phrase she whispered to him, which made her heart soar with joy. However, her son Shoto approached, arms crossed and a disapproving look on his face. He reminded her of the addictive nature of her cookies, but Rei defended her intentions, claiming she just wanted to spread love and happiness. Their playful banter continued, with Shoto blushing at her teasing remarks about his appearance. In a moment of mischief, Rei shoved a cookie into Shoto's mouth, causing him to choke slightly. She quickly apologized and fled the scene, watching from a distance as Momo rushed to Shoto's side, offering him water and engaging him in conversation. Rei felt satisfied. Her mission was a success, and she was one step closer to her goal of grandchildren. After enjoying the cookies, the teams headed to the fields for their mission. Team A entered the building, only to be ambushed by Katsuki. His sneak attack damaged Izuku's mask, but Izuku skillfully evaded while protecting Achiko. The fight escalated, showcasing Izuku's growth as he countered Katsuki's moves, revealing that he had been studying Katsuki's fighting style for years. The competition concluded with Tenya emerging as the victor, while Izuku was left injured and Katsuki threw a fit. It was chaotic, but Rei was ready for her class next. She had some special t-shirts prepared, and her excitement bubbled over as she anticipated the fun ahead. With a maniacal laugh echoing in her mind, she prepared to unleash her next plan. As the students settled into their seats, a vindictive smirk crept onto Rei Todoroki's face as she observed the hopeful heroes in training. She greeted the class with an enthusiastic, albeit slightly raspy, "Good morning, class." Immediately, all eyes were on her as she continued to scan the room. "My name is Rei Todoroki, bringer of frost, worshipper of Kakashi, baker of cookies, and above all else, your teacher for perhaps the only first-year subject that can save your lives," she announced. Rei knew that most of her students were eager to learn how to utilize their quirks and master flashy moves, but she had a crucial lesson for them. Brute force will not make you a hero. It won't always help you save the day. Yes, strength is important, but above all, you need to understand the situation and know how to proceed. In her class, they would engage in various training exercises and mock drills that depicted the scenarios they might face early in their careers as heroes. They would learn strategies, negotiations, and, most importantly, how to save lives. Today, we will focus on something very important: teamwork and problem solving. Some of you might wonder why teamwork is necessary. You might think that becoming super strong will make you self-sufficient. But let me tell you, that approach will not work. Rei glanced at Bakugo, who was scoffing. Heroes don't work alone. We need teams to function and save the day. Imagine a villain terrorizing downtown and knocking down a building with people inside while you are all alone. You would be in serious trouble. One student, Mina, frowned and asked why she couldn't just fight the villain. Rei explained that while fighting might seem like a solution, the real question was about the civilians. You might be a strong hero, but you are just one person. If you engage the villain, who will save the people trapped inside the building? Who will clear the area to prevent casualties from falling debris? The classroom fell silent as the students contemplated the situation, realizing the variables they had previously overlooked. This is why multiple heroes are present even in minor incidents. Some fight the villain, others manage the surroundings, and some assist the civilians and the injured. Even pro heroes have sidekicks because they understand they cannot do everything alone. Now, enough of my lecture. Let's form teams. We have an obstacle course to run. Rei couldn't help but feel a sense of glee as she watched her students' faces shift to expressions of horror and disdain at the sight of the obstacle course and the t-shirts in her hands. Here's the drill. You will pick a name from this bowl, and whoever you get will be your partner for the day. You two will wear these shirts and complete the course. The team that finishes first will take home a box of my special cookies, she said, grinning as their eyes sparkled at the thought of her delicious treats. The students lined up to draw names from the bowl, and Rei called Izuku and Katsuki to the front. Izuku looked nervous, while Katsuki struggled to suppress his usual scowl, knowing better than to show any disrespect, especially with Rei having photos from last year's trip to Korea. Hey, Race the thing. You two are going to team up, she said, suppressing a smile at their shocked expressions as they began to protest. You won't fully understand this until you gain field experience, but listen carefully. During your career as a hero, you won't get along with everyone you meet. You need to learn to compromise and put your differences aside, otherwise, lives could be lost. Rei's serious tone made an impact as she observed their grim faces. Izuku's expression hardened with determination as he took the t-shirt from her hands and turned to Katsuki. Come on, Kaken. We can do this. Katsuki scoffed, let's just get this over with. But his resolve faltered as he glanced at Rei, remembering the photos from Korea that kept him in line. As they walked toward the field, Izuku suddenly turned back. Sensei, don't we need another shirt? Why would you need another one? She asked, tilting her head in confusion. Because there are two of us and one shirt, he replied, sweat forming on his brow. You're both supposed to wear the same shirt, silly, she said, enjoying the sight of Izuku blushing while Katsuki yelled in protest. There's no way I'm wearing that, he exclaimed. Amid the chaos, Rei couldn't help but notice how flustered Izuku looked, and a wave of panic washed over her as she began to contemplate the situation. Her thoughts spiraled as she wondered if she should ship Uraraka with Deku or Bakugo. It was clear that Rei's mind had officially short-circuited. She pondered the possibilities, Uraraka and Deku or Deku and Bakugo. What about Uraraka and Bakugo? Kirishima nudged Shoto, concerned. Is something wrong with Sensei? She doesn't look so good. Shoto frowned, glancing at her as they prepared to fit into the shirt. They had become partners. Rei reassured everyone that things would return to normal, as this was a common occurrence. Tenya, feeling the urgency, insisted that they needed to start the course without delay. Rei then commanded the students to begin running, her voice filled with energy, prompting all the students to take off. However, chaos ensued as half the team stumbled over one another in their haste. As Rei observed the students, she noted the various teams that had formed, and a familiar excitement washed over her. She recognized the pairings, Deku and Bakugo, Shoto and Kirishima, Kaminari and Jiraiya, Ida and Momo. So many new combinations, so many potential relationships, each one looking adorable. Rei found herself overwhelmed with possibilities, wondering whom she should support with whom. In her mind, she had solid pairings for this story, but after exploring other perspectives and reading different interpretations, she felt genuinely puzzled. She reflected on her favorite pairings, admitting that she was particularly fond of Uraraka and Deku, as well as Todoroki and Momo, along with Jiraiya and Kaminari. When she first began laying out her plans for changing the future, there were certain principles that Rei instilled in her mind. These were not strict rules but guiding statements that helped her maintain clarity and avoid feeling overwhelmed by the challenges ahead. One of the key lessons she reminded herself of was that she was not omnipresent. She could not change everything. The future depended on various factors and people's choices. Instead of trying to play God and alter every negative outcome, she chose to be a helper. She aimed to smooth out the rough edges of the future, preventing major traumas while allowing the new generation of heroes to learn and grow. This included her son and her beloved students. Rei understood that their encounters with the League of Villains would ultimately benefit them, providing invaluable experience and revealing their weaknesses, enabling them to become better heroes. Although she wished to prevent the USJ attack and preserve their innocence a little longer, she recognized the significance of that particular arc. During the USJ arc, Class 1A experienced their first real-life encounter with the world of pro-heroes. They were introduced to the League of Villains and Shigaraki Tamura, who would become one of their main adversaries. They also faced the Nomus, and this arc fostered important friendships, particularly between Kirishima and Bakugo. Due to the circumstances of their world, Rei was unable to attend the USJ training program with the students. On the day of the attack, she was scheduled to work with her husband to apprehend a villain with a unique quirk that allowed their body to transform into water. This villain was not a fighter but a master escape artist who had stolen millions in merchandise and always evaded capture by slipping through drains. The task of capturing the villain was assigned to Endeavor's agency because the villain's next target was a high-profile businessman known for selling rare artifacts and jewels to Japan's elite. The businessman had personally approached the agency for assistance, necessitating Endeavor's direct involvement in the capture. Although NG could have handled the situation alone, he was concerned that his quirk might inadvertently harm the villain, as his intense heat could cause significant damage. Therefore, Rei was assigned to help freeze the villain's body, facilitating an easier capture while ensuring the villain could return to normal once the ice melted. This meant that Rei could only join the class midway after completing her assignment. In the weeks following the attack, Rei trained her class to the best of her ability, emphasizing teamwork strategies. She ensured that all the students were familiar with each other's quirks, enabling even the most unlikely pairs to collaborate effectively. Aware that their quirks alone were insufficient to confront experienced villains, she taught them the importance of strength in numbers and the element of surprise. Rei introduced her students to the basics of martial arts and hand-to-hand combat, particularly focusing on students like Jiro and Achiko, whose quirks were less effective in direct confrontations. She organized rotations so that everyone became comfortable with each other and recognized each other's strengths. While they were not yet perfectly synchronized, she understood that such teamwork took years to develop. However, she was pleased with their progress, especially when Midoriya and Bakugo occasionally worked together. Their sessions were filled with shouting and playful banter, primarily from Bakugo, but they managed to accomplish their tasks. During one class, Rei decided to implement a heroes versus villains exercise inspired by All Might. Midoriya and Bakugo took on the roles of villains, while Shiro and Mineta played the heroes. The villains were tasked with stealing money from a bank and escaping within a set time frame, while the heroes aimed to capture them. Initially, it seemed the villains would secure an easy victory, as Bakugo used his quirk to burn Shiro's tape, and Mineta struggled to trap them with his sticky orbs. However, as time dwindled, Shiro and Mineta vanished from sight. Bakugo and Midoriya were caught up in a debate about escape routes when suddenly, Shiro leaped into action, wrapping his tape around both of them. Bakugo attempted to use his quirk, but it was ineffective, and Midoriya couldn't devise a plan before the alarm signaled the end of the exercise. It turned out that Shiro had cleverly attached Mineta's orbs to his tape, creating a trap that was nearly impossible to escape. The orbs were strong enough to restrain even All Might, making their situation dire, especially since they neutralized Bakugo's quirk. Bakugo reacted with frustration, throwing a tantrum, but Rei intervened with a firm lecture about his behavior. She reminded them that they were no longer children, the moment they chose to pursue a profession centered on saving lives and protecting others was when their childhood ended. It was time for them to mature and take responsibility for their actions, even in the face of defeat. Midoriya had devised an excellent plan, and if only Bakugo had listened, they would have reached the safe zone with minutes to spare. Instead, Bakugo chose to argue without reason, struggling to manage his temper. As a hero, he would face many emotionally taxing decisions, and losing control was not an option. Hero work required a calm and rational mind, and he needed to head to the viewing area. They would discuss Midoriya's performance later. Bakugo sulked for a day, but during the following classes, he threw himself into his work with an unprecedented vigor. He was also making a concerted effort to keep his temper in check. While others might not have noticed much change, as he still erupted into shouts and curses occasionally, Rei could see his determination. His outbursts were taking longer to surface, and he wore a scowl more often. Having raised him, she recognized how hard he was trying to control his anger. Witnessing his efforts to improve brought a smile to Rei's face, and she was certain Midoriya noticed the change as well, as he too was working harder than ever. However, this brief moment of peace came to an end on the day of the attack. Rei left their home fully dressed in her pro-hero uniform, with NG by her side. She embraced Shoto tightly, reminding him to stay safe and remember her lessons. He nodded seriously in response. As she entered the car, she kept a watchful eye on her phone, anticipating Nizu's emergency call, waiting for the inevitable. They were filing police paperwork when Rei finally received the call from Nizu. "Rei, this is an emergency. USJ has been breached by an unknown group of villains. and they have taken the entirety of Class 1A hostage. One of the students managed to escape and bring us the information. According to him, Shota and 13 are not in good condition and have been incapacitated. You are the closest to the location and can arrive far earlier than we can. We need you there as soon as possible. Rei responded that she would be there as quickly as she could. She planned to bring Endeavor with her and requested Nizu to ensure paramedics were on standby, aware of the potential for injured students. She emphasized the need for Recovery Girl to be ready for serious injuries and urged him to come as soon as possible, given the uncertainty of the situation inside. NG. Rei called out, rushing over to him as he spoke with one of the officers. We need to leave. There's an emergency at UA. Emergency? What happened? He asked, surprised. There's no time to explain. I'll tell you everything in the car. Just hurry up. Once they were in the car, Rei quickly input the location into the GPS and asked NG to follow the directions as swiftly as possible. She activated the car sirens to avoid being stopped by traffic lights or other vehicles. You said it was an emergency at UA. Why are we going to the unforeseen simulation joint? He questioned. The first years went there for quirk training this afternoon with Eraserhead and 13. In the middle of their training, they were ambushed by villains. According to Nizu, there are many villains inside, and they have overwhelmed the heroes. Fortunately, one of the students managed to escape and inform the teachers that we are coming as backup. Wait, first years? Is Shoto in that group? He asked, tensing as he focused on the road, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. Rei nodded in response. She gently placed her hand on his bicep and reassured him, saying that everything would be okay. All the teachers would be there, including All Might. She reminded him that Shoto was capable of protecting himself and that she had been training the students since the beginning of the year. They were more than capable of taking care of each other, and he needed to have a little faith. The atmosphere in the car grew tense, and an uncomfortable silence settled between them. Rei felt a surge of electricity as her nerves heightened, aware of everything around her. The heat emanating from NG's quirk intensified the air inside the vehicle. Upon reaching the facility entrance, both husband and wife exited the car without bothering to park it properly. As they rushed toward the entrance, they spotted All Might charging into the building, tackling a massive creature. Seeing the Nomu in person was a stark contrast to merely hearing about it. The Nomu was a large, black humanoid monster with a muscular build and numerous scars. Its brain was exposed on top of its head, surrounded by large eyes. It had a beak-like mouth filled with sharp teeth and wore only beige pants and metal knee pads designed to resemble skulls. Its feet and torso were bare. Tamura stood a few paces away, holding Izuku, Tsuyu, and Minoru captive. Enji, help All Might fight that thing. I'll take the kids to safety. Rei shouted, using her ice quirk to propel herself toward Tamura, who held the children. She launched ice at him, forcing him to retreat and creating an ice shield between the villains and the children. Izuku, take them both and run. I'll rescue Eraserhead. Izuku nodded, along with the others, and began to flee toward the entrance. Suddenly, he turned back, warning her that the creature was dangerous and that none of their attacks had worked on it. He urged her to be careful. Don't worry, Izuku. Both the number 1 and number 2 heroes are here, and all the teachers are on their way. We just need a little more time, and everything will be okay. Focus on getting to safety and helping other students along the way. You all are safe now. Rei turned her attention to Shigaraki, who was attempting to rise from the ground. Before he could fully regain his footing, she encased him in an ice barrier, adding an extra layer for good measure. She knew capturing him now could lead to complications, as Major League members were still undercover, and All for One would likely retreat if Shigaraki was captured too soon. Looking back, she saw All Might and Endeavor engaged in battle with the Nomu. She felt confident they could handle it, as this Nomu was significantly weaker than those encountered later in the story. Turning her focus back to Shota, she carefully picked him up, trying not to aggravate his injuries. They had arrived faster than in the original timeline, which meant Shota did not need to engage the Nomu again, preventing further injuries, but he had still lost consciousness. Rei raced back to the entrance with Shota on her back, using her ice to propel herself forward while simultaneously trapping the remaining villains. After placing him in a safe spot, she dashed back toward the fight. She needed to act quickly, as this was the moment Kurogiri would make his entrance and attempt to take down All Might. As she approached, she noticed the purple mist beginning to form, signaling Kurogiri's arrival. Enji was preoccupied with the Nomu while Kurogiri targeted All Might. Just as Kurogiri was about to advance, Shoto and Bakugo charged into the scene. Bakugo unleashed his explosion quirk on Kurogiri's face, causing him to falter, while Shoto assisted his father by freezing part of the Nomu's body. As the heroes took a moment to regroup, Rei rushed toward Kurogiri, gripping his shoulder pads and instructing Bakugo and Shoto to stay behind the heroes. Suddenly, Tamura appeared with another unknown villain, ice still encasing part of his body as he stumbled into the scene, one of his legs partially frozen. Tamura commanded the Nomu to eliminate Rei and recover their gateway. The Nomu rose from the ground, but its frozen half shattered in the process. Nevertheless, it began to regenerate its wounds, returning to its normal state. Nomu launched an attack at Rei, but Endeavor rushed in to shield her from the onslaught. In the chaos, Kurogiri slipped free from Rei's grasp and returned to Tamura's side. Witnessing Endeavor's protective act, Tamura began to speak about violence, asserting that both heroes and villains resort to it to safeguard their allies. He claimed that the title symbol of peace was merely a guise for oppression, accusing All Might of using it to perpetuate further violence. All Might dismissed these claims as nonsense. The confrontation escalated as All Might and Nomu exchanged blows in a fierce battle. Determined to overcome the challenge, All Might resolved to push beyond his limits, realizing that his previous strikes had barely affected Nomu. With a powerful punch, he sent Nomu flying out of the USJ, securing a decisive victory. As Nomu was defeated, Tamura felt a wave of despair wash over him. All Might questioned Tamura's hesitation to engage, reminding him that his mission was to eliminate him. Panic set in for Tamura, as he understood that without Nomu, their chances against All Might were slim. Kurogiri urged Tamura to remain calm, reminding him that Nomu had inflicted considerable damage on All Might, and they still had a chance to succeed. Reassured, Tamura steeled himself to continue what Nomu had started. As Kurogiri and Tamura charged at the taunting All Might, both Rei and Endeavor rushed forward to protect the injured hero. However, before they could clash, Tamura was struck by a gunshot, signaling the arrival of the pro heroes. With the UA pro heroes now present, Tamura declared that their game was officially over. In an unexpected turn, the heavily damaged 13 appeared, unleashing a black hole on Kurogiri and Tamura. As they were drawn into the void, Tamura vowed that although they had failed this time, they would surely succeed in their mission to defeat All Might next time. Both Kurogiri and Tamura were then consumed by the darkness. Rei found herself wandering through the bustling streets of the city, her mind racing with thoughts of her recent challenges. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter and chatter, a stark contrast to the turmoil she had been feeling inside. As she turned a corner, she unexpectedly bumped into a figure cloaked in shadows. Dabi stood before her, his presence commanding yet enigmatic. He had a reputation that preceded him, one that sent shivers down the spines of many. Rei felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension as she took in his appearance. His eyes, sharp and piercing, seemed to hold secrets of their own. In that moment, Rei's heart raced, not from fear but from an inexplicable connection she felt towards him. Dabi, noticing her hesitation, smirked slightly, a hint of amusement dancing in his gaze. He was used to people being wary of him, but there was something different about Rei. As they exchanged glances, Rei sensed a storm brewing within him, a battle of emotions that mirrored her own struggles. She wanted to know more about him, to understand the depths of his character beyond the rumors that surrounded him. Dabi, in turn, was intrigued by her bravery, a quality he rarely encountered. The world around them faded as they stood in that moment, two souls drawn together by fate. Rei felt a surge of determination. She would not let fear dictate her actions. She took a step closer, ready to confront the unknown that lay ahead, both in her life and in her newfound connection with Dabi. As the sun began to set, Casting a warm glow over the city, Rei and Dobby stood at the precipice of a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty but also with the promise of adventure. Together, they would navigate the complexities of their lives, forging a bond that could withstand the trials to come. On a different note, the aftermath of the USJ incident was about to unfold, and all the characters were processing the events in their own ways. Nefera had decided to put the story on a permanent hiatus. The busy schedule made it difficult to continue, and there was a sense of disappointment with the story's direction. The early chapters had been written in a different mindset, and the growth since then had led to a realization about the importance of character depth and emotional authenticity. Looking back, Nefera recognized that the plot had been manipulated to cover up certain mistakes and provide excuses for characters' actions, which felt disingenuous. For instance, Rei's forgiveness of Enji for the incident involving Tuya seemed unrealistic upon reflection. It became clear that this chapter should have explored the widening cracks in their relationship, showcasing Rei's doubts about Enji's potential for redemption. The handling of Enji's struggles had also been rushed, attempting to evoke sympathy without fully addressing the gravity of his actions. The shift in tone throughout the story from serious to lighthearted reflected a struggle to maintain consistency, indicating uncertainty about the story's direction. Nefera acknowledged the numerous spelling and punctuation errors, as well as plot holes that had emerged. The lack of research on certain topics had led to misunderstandings, and there was an awareness of the potential consequences of misrepresenting sensitive subjects. In conclusion, Nefera expressed gratitude to the readers for their support, especially those who had been loyal from the beginning. The hope was that, even though this story was ending, readers would be open to future works. The journey had been meaningful, and every reader was appreciated for their engagement and feedback. Nefera stood confidently, her presence commanding attention as she surveyed the room. Her sharp gaze took in every detail, and an air of mystery surrounded her. She was a figure of intrigue, drawing others in with her enigmatic charm. As she moved, the whispers of those around her faded into the background, leaving only the sound of her own thoughts echoing in her mind. Nefera was determined to uncover the secrets that lay hidden beneath the surface, ready to face whatever challenges awaited her.